All right, welcome everyone. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to our first episode of Recovery Plus. This is going to be an amazing channel we're starting up here for the recovery community, those suffering from addiction or alcoholism. I'm here with my friend Vaz Solo, my colleague, and my name is Jama Maxi. First episode today, we really just wanted to do an introduction, get everyone accustomed to what our stories are, what our experiences, and sort of our motivations behind starting this podcast. So today I'm going to be interviewing Vaz on his experience in recovery and his motivations behind, starting this up and starting his whole Recovery Plus movement and all the other wonderful things he's done for the recovery community in the last couple of years. So Vaz Solo is a recovered drug addict and alcoholic and a certified meditation coach whose purpose in life is to help others who have a stronger recovery. His own recovery started with working the 12-step program, which resulted in a spiritual awakening that removed his obsession to drink and use drugs. And for a while, he felt amazing. He was floating on that pink cloud that comes in early recovery. But after a year being in the program, the pink cloud feeling went away. And he found himself struggling with negative thoughts and emotions on a daily basis. And while praying, writing inventory, helping others helped him stay sober, it didn't make those negative thoughts and emotions go away. Vaz felt that to get to a better place, he needed more spiritual growth, which he began seeking by exploring various spiritual paths. After a year of doing this, he ended up finding a method of meditation that would radically change his life. This experience led him to create Recovery Plus, along with an online meditation course for recovering addicts to show them that recovery doesn't have to be slow and painful, that with the right tools, they can make quick and life-changing progress. Friends, Vaz Solo.
Hey, what's going on, Jama? I'm super excited to do our first episode. As we were talking just before we started the podcast, it's we're gonna experiment with different formats and see what works, and hopefully eventually find something that people enjoy and also benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my addict thinking at first when we talked about this is I just wanted it to be perfect. I wanted it to skyrocket, first episode. But as we know, through our recovery journeys, that's just not how life works, right? You're not just going to jump into the gym and throw 350 pounds over your head and your first day there, it's going to go right through your skull. You're going to drop it because you haven't, done the work. You haven't put in the necessary steps to get to that point. So that's how I'm kind of viewing this podcast. We'll see how it goes. And so why don't you tell the viewers how we met and, how that started?
So you and I met through work. We both work at a treatment center for people recovering from addiction. And I mean, we both kind of through conversations at work realized that we shared a lot in common, especially in our worldview. And so, that's kind of what sparked our friendship. And I know you're somebody who's really big on self-improvement and continued growth, and I am too. And, little by little, we kind of started exploring the idea of having a podcast together that would, share these ideas with other people in recovery. And here we are recording our first podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't really think it would take off. It was sort of an idea. I remember our first kind of like encounter where we kind of nodded heads and saw similar in a similar manner. We were talking in regards to a political stance that I think you thought perhaps that I was going to go one way, but I didn't go that one way. I didn't adopt the victim mentality because that's not what my recovery has taught me to be a victim. And we kind of just, flourished into a friendship after that and had a lot of good conversations, recovery, politics, and all sorts of different topics. So, and it's an amazing job, right? Like I feel like that job, it provides as reading your bio, you said your purpose in life. Do you think the job at the treatment center helps align with that purpose?
Yeah, 100%. When I started working at the treatment center where we both work, I honestly never expected to get that job. It's not something that I
Right.
was actively seeking. I was, during the pandemic and all the lockdowns, I was mainly focused on making videos for my YouTube channel, on building the online meditation course that I ended up, setting up for people in recovery. Uh, the only thing is that by the time that everything was kind of wrapping up in terms of lockdowns, and um, I was starting to realize that I needed a reliable source of income.
Right.
Right, like my meditation course wasn't necessarily selling that well, and I wasn't making any money off of YouTube, and so I was kind of at this impasse, thinking like, what do I do? Right, I need to be able to pay the bills, but I also want to help people. And so this opportunity to work at the center where we're at, it just kind of fell in my lap. I saw a post on Facebook.
Mhm.
I applied, and then 3 days later I was there and getting trained. So it was amazing. I definitely look at it as God's will. um,
Definitely.
and something that I'm meant to be doing. I've grown a lot in the last 6 months. I never thought I'd be so challenged by what we do. And so, yeah, I'm definitely happy to be there.
So, what's an area you think you've grown the most as an addiction counselor from your previous employment as meditation coach?
The area I'd say I've grown the most, or at least one of them, is not necessarily applying the same approach to every person that I work with. Like, there's a lot of similarities
Right.
from client to client, but when I first got the job, I was a 12-step guy. Right. For
Yeah.
me, it was like 12 steps or bust,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everything else doesn't work,
Yeah.
or maybe not doesn't work, but it's not going to produce the same profound change that it produced in my life.
Yes.
And but from working at the center, I realized that people are coming into treatment at different levels of readiness to change,
Mhm.
and from sort of different backgrounds. And one of the challenges for me has been to meet people where they're at,
Right.
and then help them from there, rather than just saying, okay, you need the 12 steps, you need to find
Yeah.
God.
I think your experience is very similar with mine. I started working as addiction counselor in August of 2021. And again, I'm a 12 step guy. And I felt like originally I just kind of came in there very narrow minded because I know what worked for me. Another thing in our 12 step literature, there's different types of addicts, and I wasn't very open minded to that. So I really just applied everyone as a type 3 addict, the one that needs that radical change, the one that needs to be 2 foot in a recovery program, like a 12-step program. But over the years, I definitely expanded in that way because my first experience with that was one that there's so many different ways that people stay sober, and that there's also utility in expanding, more things that people do. And like, we're very spiritual people, and there's different spiritual programs or just even ways of living that keep people grounded, like people who go to church or follow a religion. A lot of times those can be very useful in the recovery. I just know what works for me, and I think that sometimes I try to push that agenda onto other people. And it's been an amazing experience myself. I grow every single day at the treatment facility, and you encounter so many different people. Um, so just flipping gears a bit. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Growing up, I know you didn't grow up in Canada, which is obviously interesting. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I was born in Latvia, which is right beside Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. And my dad is Russian, my mom is Lithuanian. I grew up speaking Russian, and we immigrated to Canada when I was 9. And I remember that I was really excited to leave Latvia because I imagined Canada would be like California for some reason. I watched a lot of Hollywood
Yeah,
movies, and I pictured myself living in this like beautiful neighborhood, getting a skateboard, going to the beach. Uh, and when I got here, it was definitely not what I had imagined, but I was happy to leave Latvia because honestly, I didn't like growing up there that much. There was nothing that kind of
Hmm.
felt like home there for me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've been that way my whole life, to be honest. Like I don't necessarily identify uh, with the place that I live. Like I do feel like I'm Canadian and I love Canada as a country, but I wouldn't be opposed to moving somewhere else and living there. You know, I don't have a strong, what I would call like a Russian identity, even though, you know,
Okay.
my mom and my dad, like they have those Russian values and cultural sort of cultural things like the way we celebrate Christmas and
Right.
birthdays, right? But I don't identify too strongly with that.
Do you think that impacted you and your identity in any way, or the buzzword now is kind of like an identity crisis? And
I don't know. I don't think so. I remember the my biggest struggle was I had no issues fitting in when I got here. I barely spoke any English, but I was a really confident kid. Uh, I did get bullied by these two guys in grade three because I had an accent when I spoke. But I stood up for myself, and more generally, everybody else accepted me. So I never fell into this sort of kind of self pity mode where I felt like I didn't fit in or anything like that.
oh, interesting. Yeah, no, I know a lot of people struggle with that. Working with clients and stuff, they have some sort of, especially people of, first generation immigrants to a new country. A lot of the times can struggle with, that fitting into Canadian culture. But it sounds like you got accustomed very early, and obviously you speak amazing English, and that was a quick transition for yourself. So moving into high school and things of that nature, what was your life like at that time?
Oh, high school for me was probably it was an interesting time. It was when I started to experiment with smoking weed, with drinking, with doing magic mushrooms. I would say that my high school years were characterized by an existential longing. So really trying
Right.
to understand what the point of life is.
Mhm.
You know what I
You
mean?
didn't,
Yeah.
you didn't have like that purpose yet in life.
Definitely not. And I did not see myself taking the sort of standard route of finishing high school, going to college, getting the job, getting married. Like to me, all of that stuff seemed sort of pointless and like following the herd mentality. I always felt like there was something special I was meant to do
Right, right,
for
right.
for better or for worse, you know?
Yeah. Do you think were you like involved with, people that you wouldn't hang out with today? Like, did you get caught up in, a lot of people say they follow the crowd or follow the cool people. Did you fall into that trap?
No, I was the opposite. I was somebody who judged the quote unquote popular kids, right? I felt like following trends was kind of foolish. I'm like, well, why do you want to do something that everybody else does just because everybody else is doing it? Like I was constantly very judgmental about those people. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah, I just know that a lot of people have that experience. I think in my life followed the cool group or whatever that led me to experiment with drugs and alcohol. Um, but similar to you, I also, wasn't such a problem in high school, right?
Yeah, for sure. I just, I remember that feeling like this sense of feeling different from other people and also just noticing how much I enjoyed altering my state of mind with substances. I became a pothead really quickly
Yeah,
after
yeah.
trying it, and I remember that smoking weed just brought new color to the world for me.
Hmm.
Like my sober experience of the world was the world is dull, gray, oppressive, boring, meaningless. And then when I would smoke, um, it just felt like, there was like endless possibilities. Even sitting in math class and listening to a lecture was really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can relate to that so much. I identify with that. Like with the weed smoking, that was like my first love, I think, of any of drugs or alcohol, and I got into it the summer before getting into high school, and um, it just felt like life with not being high is meaningless. And I like you said that like me to go to school would just be a useless day if I'm not stoned, or to hang out with my friends if I'm not stoned. Like I needed it to just kind of like get by and function, and to feel like life had a purpose in it, and I identify with that so much. And I find it very funny that people have so similar experiences in recovery, and that I'm able to sit here with you and just really identify.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that most people who become type 3 addicts, you mentioned type 3 addict as somebody who needs a spiritual experience in order to recover and stop using drugs. Um, we all share that similar feeling of feeling different from other people, feeling a sense of emptiness, no matter how many friends we have or what we're accomplishing in life. And it's very hard for us to know what we're looking for, because society is telling us you're going to find it in the external world, right? Through all of these external things. But to look
Mhm.
inside, like nobody really teaches us that. Like my parents didn't teach me that. My teachers didn't teach me that. So
Yeah, that's been a real awakening for me, is realizing that a lot of these internal things lead to external consequences, right? I mean, the way I think, the way I feel, that's the reason why I want to numb out. And it's been put to me a million times, Jama, you have a thinking problem. And I could not understand that for the first little bit of recovery, but now it's so clear to me. Whenever someone cuts me off in traffic, or there's somebody playing lottery in front of me in the gas station, and I'm trying to get, pay for my gas, and they have like five encores, and I'm just thinking all types of, and I see it now. It truly is a thinking problem, and manifests in drugs and alcohol. Did you have anyone, I asked this because there's people in my life at, around adolescence and the teenage years and all those things, to kind of direct you towards a path of recovery, or tell you to reach out to services, or bring you down that path at all.
not when I was in high school or in my early 20s. Then I was just on this sort of singular path of I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Like nobody's going to tell me what to do with my life. Nobody's going to tell me that I need to
Yeah.
stop partying or stop pursuing my career in music. I wanted to become a rapper, from the age of 16 to the age of 23. That's like the only thing I cared about. Uh, but all throughout that time, when I was writing lyrics and recording stuff, at the same time I was doing a lot of drinking, a lot of getting high, and i did not I did not realize that I was full of insecurities, full of self-doubt, right? Like a part of me wanted to become this successful musician, but another
Right.
part of me was not really willing to put himself out there and to do what I needed to do in order to make that happen.
Yeah, the insecurities and stuff, the low self esteem, and those things, they really hit hard, but we don't even know about them
I
at
didn't even
early
recognize
age.
it. Yeah, I just made up excuses for why I felt that way. Right? It was always something external to me. It's like I'm not going to be able to necessarily get really popular because what's popular is a certain type of music, and I make a different kind of music. Right? It's more cerebral. It's more conscious. Like silly kind of excuses. It was only when I started using cocaine heavily
And
when I
when
was
was that?
26.
26. Okay.
That's when things started to really take a turn for the worse, right? My drinking was an issue before that, but I always
Sure.
kind of just bounced back from
Yeah.
every from every insane experience that I had while being very drunk. But when I started to use cocaine regularly, which for me was like every weekend, and then it became, more than that, then I started to really think like, oh, like this is not good. Like normal people don't use drugs like this.
Right, right. When was the first time you kind of had that realization, like, man, I really need to get my stuff together because this is not like everyone else. Like I'm using differently.
It was like after the first month of picking up cocaine every single weekend, I'm like, holy crap, I've been doing coke like every weekend now for
Yeah,
4 weeks in a row, and um, that's never happened before.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I always like cocaine and stimulant like that. It's such a powerful stimulant. Um, the question to me always is anyone who does cocaine is why not do it all the time? Because it's a stimulant that makes you well, money would definitely be a
Yeah.
big factor, and I'm very glad I didn't have copious amounts of money when I was using cocaine. But it activates that dopaminergic system in our brain that gives us reward, and but the thing is that some people can turn it on and then turn it off, right? So when you realized you couldn't turn it off, where did you get help, or when did you want to get help?
So that happened about 7 years into my heavy cocaine use, which got worse and worse, obviously, after I tried it. Um, I went to a 12-step meeting. I went to a 12-step meeting, and I heard people talk about how they were able to recover from their hopeless, condition of mind and body. Like the stories that they shared resonated with me. The powerlessness that they felt resonated with me because for 7 years I had been trying to stop and had been completely unsuccessful. And
From your
so
Did you resonate a lot with like the you trying to solve your problems is not gonna, you like you said you tried to solve it for 7 years. Was that like a big eye-opening moment where you're like, okay, I'm me trying to do it on my own is not working?
for sure, my addiction had finally beaten me down to a point of humility where I said, okay, like I've exhausted all of my own internal resources and I haven't been able to fix this problem. And so it was for the first time when I actually became willing to take directions from other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And after, going through the 12 steps, how did your life change?
For me, doing the steps completely altered my perspective on the world, on myself, and on the meaning of life. Um, First of all, I realized that, like you mentioned earlier, I had a thinking problem. That the reason I felt so hopeless, so anxious, so depressed, um, was because of the attitudes and beliefs that I was holding on to. Right? I realized that I was a very judgmental person. I realized that I was a very fearful person,
Right.
selfish person. And when I realized that, I knew that in order to change the way I felt, I had to change the way I thought.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned, like earlier in the episode, you were talking about, being judgmental at an early, in adolescence. And what I found is like going through this process, and looking at yourself internally and, getting pen to paper and things of that nature, is you see patterns, right? And we call them character defects, right? You can essentially look at them as character flaws or ways of being that don't serve a purpose, and what I noticed too is I had like those patterns in life that constantly kind of came up, and they were similar. The fears, being judgmental, self pity, selfishness, dishonesty. Like, I think that's really an amazing part of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people at our treatment center, I say, if you think you're here to change other people, or by changing your external circumstances, you're going to fix your problem, you're wrong. You're here to actually look at yourself and to change the parts of you that are sick, which are causing you to experience life as painful and unbearable, right? And hence you're reaching for these substances to get out of self.
Yeah, yeah. And I like how you mentioned meaning as well because I do, find so much of the existential kind of way of thinking, which is people essentially lack meaning in their lives, and that's what brings a lot of neurotic emotions. And that was the case for myself. And hearing other people who had that experience, just solidifies my belief is, um, because like I said earlier about the cocaine thing, right? If you have a meaningful life, um, then you're going to withstand from cocaine to some degree, right? Like my favorite experiment is the one with the rats, where they have like a control group of rats, that are family oriented. They have like brothers, sisters, friends, family in a group, and then they have the liquid cocaine on one side, and they have one single rat, with liquid cocaine. And when the rat is by itself, it always, or has a strong tendency to overdose and die. Whereas when it's with the family, it has a meaningful life. It has a community. It does rat-like things because rats don't live alone. Because if rats live alone, that's not their natural state. It doesn't overdose. And so, speaking of that community, how did the community help you?
So the 12-step fellowship was definitely a huge part of my recovery. They offered me that mental, emotional, and spiritual support that I needed. Uh, it was a group of people who had the same goal, who had come from the same struggle, right? So I was able to find unity there. I was able to share some of the more embarrassing things that I probably would be uncomfortable sharing with somebody who hadn't experienced addiction. So
Right.
that was a huge, huge benefit to being in a fellowship. The regularity of the meetings, going to a meeting on a Saturday night instead of
Yeah.
sitting home alone wondering what to do with my time, that was a huge plus, right? Hearing other people's experiences and getting hope from those experiences, or learning things that I could change about my lifestyle that would help me to continue growing in recovery. Those were all incredibly beneficial aspects of being in a community of people who are seeking recovery.
Yeah, it's that sense of belongingness. I think that if I could summarize what you're saying, you felt like a sense of belongingness because you're, like people who go to church, they have that sense of belongingness or religious affiliations because they're all gathered in circle, in some fundamental sense to worship or um, to strive for the same goal, right? And there's unison about that, right? And with 12-step communities, there's that same kind of unison where we're all gathered around. It's very evident when we hold hands and we say our prayer at the end and things like that. We're all synchronized together for a common purpose, right? And that's what I really loved about the 12-step program is the community aspect because I was so isolated as well. So, you mentioned you had a very, six in your bio and just, speaking with you, you completed, a good couple of years of recovery, which is amazing. But you mentioned the pink cloud. What would you say the pink cloud is for viewers, just so people who don't understand that where it is?
So the pink cloud is what most people in recovery refer to as that period of time where you just feel really good. Like suddenly we go from being anxious, depressed, feeling hopeless, using drugs constantly, separated from our families, to this place where things start to improve, where mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I start to feel better. And so I like to think of it as, before I was living under an overcast sky, and then suddenly the clouds are parting and I'm feeling the warm rays of the sun for the first time ever. Right. So it's a very glorious experience, especially because for many, many years, I have been in this dark, dark place without the sun. Right. And so to
Right.
feel that sun on my skin is like, it's amazing for the first time.
Right. So you have this amazing experience, going from that hopeless state of mind to revisiting a new life, a new awakening, and things are really good, all sunshine and rainbows. What changed and what made you decide to, you know, go into the meditation and to strengthen your spiritual approach? What was that process like?
So I was fortunate, and I think this is also part of God's grace. When I got into the 12-step program, simultaneously, my grandmother bought me this used book, um, which was called The Perennial Psychology of the Bhagavad Gita. And I started reading this book, and this book is written by a yogi who talks about what the spiritual path is, at least from the Eastern perspective.
Hmm.
And in that book, he talks about God having the having the tools that can actually expand my awareness and increase my experience of God's presence. And one of those tools was meditation. So I remember when I was reading that book, because simultaneously I was doing the steps and trying to surrender to a higher power or to God. And then I was reading this book about God and the spiritual path. Like they sort of went hand in hand for me. And the thing that inspired me about what the Swami was talking about is that it was essentially saying, I don't need to blindly believe anything, that I can actually verify God's existence in the laboratory of my own consciousness or experience. Right. And that there's a definite system or path that will take me to that place.
Absolutely. So, prior to this, did you do any meditation earlier in life? Did you do anything like that?
I dabbled.
Mindfulness?
I dabbled.
Dabbled. Okay, so my question to you, and I think a lot of people in maybe thinking the same thing, how were you able to break down that discipline of, daily practice and because a lot of people, they're like, it's same thing as the gym, right? I think we've had this conversation where it's like the gyms in right now. It's January 3rd. If I go to the gym, it's going to be packed with people trying to discipline themselves daily. But we all know by the end of the month, the gym will be back to normal. So how are you able to stay disciplined? Much like someone in the gym that goes every single day or 5 to 7 days a week.
That's a really good question. It's actually something that is very hard to impart on people, which is that lasting motivation to do something that's good for you. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like I remember that when I was overweight in high school, and no matter how hard I tried to eat better, to start exercising, I just could not find the motivation to do it. I was just a lazy kid,
Yeah.
right? I'd rather smoke pot and just eat a bunch of food and play video games or watch
Yeah.
TV.
The question
Uh,
is why never do that?
exactly, exactly. And so the thing that caused me to become obsessed with working out was the years of suffering in high school where I felt extremely self-conscious and
Sure.
and where I wanted girls to notice me and where I wanted to feel attractive, but I didn't. And then finally something just snapped in my head and I started to run every single day. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? It's not that the first like couple of months were super hard. I could run for like a minute and then I'd get out of breath, right? But as I kept showing up for the runs, I got better and better and I started to actually enjoy running, right? And that led to my obsession with fitness and lifting weights, and then I became a personal trainer. So it all kind of snowballed, but the genesis of that was the intense insecurity and suffering that I felt because of the way I looked.
Yeah, that's one of the ways I look at life. We teach classes and things of that nature, and I know you believe in that suffering is a part of life, and I think that suffering also can be a tremendous motivation for people moving forward, right? The example of weight loss is just a extreme easy thing for people to identify when we're talking about how suffering can push people past that uncomfortability, which is to go 7 days a week or to do something that's most people don't want to do, right? And I think of my experience with education. I'm a full-time student studying psychology. I'm in the specialized honors thesis program at York University, and even just saying that to me sometimes seems like a dream because I was not. I was a dumb kid, and people are gonna think like, why is he speaking like that? It's because it was true. I was not very intelligent growing up, and so I suffered a lot. I was the kid who, when he passed around the book, when it was Jama's time to read, everyone's like, and I suffered a lot with my reading and writing and my literacy. So, when I got into recovery and I chose to go down this path of education, I think one of the reasons why I'm so motivated and can continuously stay disciplined is because I know what it's like to not be, disciplined and fail in education, right? I've failed a lot of classes. So I think that's a lot to take out of what we're talking about today. Is like if you're suffering, in spirituality, right? Why not try something new like you did? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And just to get back to your question about meditation, uh, I I tried meditating and I felt something there, right? Like when I
sure.
would sit and close my eyes, there would be a sense of peace and a sense of I'm doing something that is important, right? and
Hmm.
and yes, there was resistance because it's a new habit that I had to establish. With like, just like with any habit, there's always going to be resistance because it's something new. But because I had experience through like the exercise and diet aspect of discipline, for me, I knew that in order for me to get any kind of benefit out of meditation, I had to do it consistently. And I also noticed that, there was periods where I would meditate for a couple of weeks and then miss a couple of days in early recovery. And I would notice how my thoughts would start to become more negative, how it's harder for me to let things go. And so having that experience proved to me that meditation was actually helping me in my recovery. And that's what motivated me to be consistent with it.
Right. So, my question to you would be: when did you feel the it not being such a task anymore? Because I believe you do enjoy it now, right?
Yeah, but it's still a task.
Fair
it's still
enough. Even
it's
people
still
who do enjoy the gym and education, it definitely still is a task. But would you say there was like a shift in mindset where you're like, this is becoming more regular and more autopilot than a task, so to speak?
definitely. I guess I'm lucky in that I never had a very long period of time where I just stopped meditating. It would like my longest period of not meditating would be only a couple of days and then I'd jump right back into it.
Hmm.
Right. And gradually by sort of building up slowly from 5 minutes to 10, from 10 to 15, from 15 to 20, from one day once a day to twice a day, right? And sort of gradually building up that practice. I was able to solidify the habit enough that even when I wake up on days like today and I don't feel like doing it, I can easily overcome that resistance, right? Whereas if somebody doesn't do it for a week or two, it's much harder.
Right, right. Yeah, that duration of like, what's the point now, right? It can make people just, avoid it altogether. So after finding this meditation in, it certainly changed your life. So now moving forward into, I guess, year three, or yeah, you started the Recovery Plus and started making a meditation course for recovering addicts. What was your motivation? What did you think was going to happen with that? And
So the reason I started my YouTube channel was simply this. I noticed that a lot of people in the 12-step program end up becoming stagnant in their pursuit of further spiritual growth. And I noticed this because there are people who radiate recovery in the rooms, and then there are people who are, 5 years in, 8 years in, who are still coming in and still dealing with the same crap.
mhm.
And my experience is that at a certain point, the 12-step program, it didn't stop working, but it wasn't producing enough growth in me or enough change.
Right. I agree with that because, like you have those moments, we call them spiritual experiences in early recovery. For me, um, doing certain steps, elevated my my experience spiritually so much that I can't even describe the duration of time we have on this podcast. But you do kind of get stagnant, right? Because you're just kind of going through the motions, right? And that emptiness, starts to kick in. So that's kind of where you stepped into the meditation, right?
That's right. We were talking about the pink cloud earlier. I also call that the honeymoon phase of recovery.
Yeah,
Okay. It's like you're a new couple and everything's exciting, everything's new. But after a while, that excitement fades. And now you're left with the work, right?
yeah,
Of actually having a strong relationship, which is
yeah,
difficult, right? And so I found that in order to rekindle that newness, to re-experience the recovery as incredibly profound and meaningful, I constantly have to challenge myself to grow spiritually. And by grow spiritually, that also involves, mentally, physically, and emotionally, right? It
so
encompasses all of those things.
so like put in this online meditation class, what has been its impact on your recovery?
Creating the course itself, or
Yeah,
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 it's it's been a trial. It's been a really difficult trial for sure, because I've never done anything like it before.
okay,
Even starting the YouTube channel, it was completely new. Like, I've never
yeah,
recorded videos, edited them. So I had to learn a lot of new things. And same with the course. To put together a whole course and to set it up online was a huge challenge. And I definitely, when I was an addict, I started things and I quit them really quickly.
right.
But thanks to the things that I learned in the 12-step program, and then further on through the things that I was practicing, um, by following a certain spiritual path, I learned how to persevere through the difficult moments, and to actually see things through. So yeah, I grew tremendously for sure.
So, fast forward into getting the job as a addiction counselor. Um, how is it teaching clients as opposed to online versus in person meditation?
Hmm, that's a good question. Um, well, when we're at the center, we're surrounded by people who are in recovery. Like, it's not just one person, it's like a bunch of people dealing with a
Sure.
bunch of strong emotions and negative thoughts. So it's very different. But when it comes to teaching, I don't know if it's really that different. Like, I guess being in person, there's a different kind of vibe to it. There's a different energy.
Yeah.
Uh, what I find is it doesn't matter whether it's online or in person. What matters is how receptive the people are that you're teaching. So
Right.
those people
Yeah.
who
I
are
can
very,
resonate.
yeah, those people who are starving for a message of recovery and who just are looking to change their lives, it doesn't matter how profound what you say is. Like, a small little thing that you say will change their perspective, right? And set them on a different path. But somebody who still thinks that they can do it on their own, or they don't want to change, they'll come to treatment, leave treatment, and still stay the same person.
Yeah, and it's such a mutual flourishing experience when you have somebody that is excited and wants to change their lives, and they're kind of like bought in treatment, right? So I've definitely noticed a few clients that have really kind of brought you aside and wanted more of this spiritual growth through meditation, to quiet the mind, right? And I think those people are people who as well have suffered a lot emotionally and
For sure.
wants to kind of alleviate that.
Yeah, listen, one of the biggest things that I thought that was wrong was, I was very naive when I discovered the 12-step program and this other way of life. um, I thought that as long as I share this stuff with anybody, that they'll grab it and be like, wow, like, I've learned something incredibly useful. But it's not like that. Like, it doesn't matter how profound it seems to me. If the person doesn't really want to learn it or care for it, it's not going to resonate, right? And so it makes those moments where a client pulls me aside and goes, like, I really enjoyed the meditation in class today. Like, it's something I think that I want to start doing. It makes those moments even more wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like one of the best experiences in, doing like different speaking engagements and stuff where I've spoken for Indigenous people. I've had those experiences where people pull me aside and they say something about the speech or elements of what was said, and it's just like a very powerful experience that I can't really explain to people. But I'm sure it does make your life a lot more meaningful when you have people that are so bought in and so interested in and learning more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always tell people I didn't create this course because I wanted another stream of income. Like
Hmm.
that's a
Yeah,
very small part of it,
yeah.
right? I teach and I work at our treatment center, not because they pay us, tons of money to counsel people. I do it
Hmm.
because it's something that I truly believe in and I love to do. And I've always been like that. I've never pursued anything just for fame, just for money.
Absolutely.
It's always been like, okay, do I believe in it? And if I do, then I want to share it with as many people as I can. And that's why we're recording this podcast. And I had the channel, and we sponsor people, and I have the course now, right? Because I believe in these things, and I know that they work, as long as people are receptive to it.
Yeah, and that's kind of goes along with this idea of happiness that we have today, and that a lot of people believe that happiness would come with the great career and the large bank account. And there's a book I read, The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, and in the book he talks about after $70,000 a year, people's scores of happiness. That's a weird measure, but let's just say life well-being or life score, enjoyment scores stop going up. And I believe the reason for that, and what Height believes as well, is it's kind of like at that point you have everything that North America is going to provide for you, right? That's the heat in the winter, air conditioning in the summer. You have food, you have clothes, you have shelter, you have virtually everything that these are huge things, by the way, because if you look across the world, um, people do not have that, right? People do not have clean water across the world. People do not have all those, the fact that I can go on and turn the heat on. So after that, you just start pursuing external things. And we talked about like the difference between external and internal, right? So I think we start to want more external things, right? Because that car is not good enough, that thing is not good enough, but no one really looks internally, and that's why I like what you have been teaching clients and as well pursuing yourself, which is to look internal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the most important paradigm shifts that's occurred in my own life. And to somebody who's not ready for it, it sounds very hokey. Like, all the
Exactly.
happiness you ever want to find is within, you
Yeah.
know, but it's absolutely true. I share this a lot in at work and with the people I work with. Um, and that is, to me, what showed me that the path that I was on was true, was meaningful, and that would bring me somewhere that I truly wanted to go, is that after working the steps, I had this moment where I realized that I was starting to experience happiness, like real happiness, um, for the first time, and it was not related to anything external. Like, I
Yeah.
had the same girlfriend, the same job, the same family. I was living in the same place. Like, nothing externally had changed to cause that happiness to grow in me. And I realized that I was actually experiencing what's already inside, and the obstacles to that experience were slowly being removed.
Yeah, yeah. The obstacles, yeah, exactly. There's like barriers towards that experience, and I like how our stories are somewhat similar, but in terms of like how we kind of strengthen spirituality as a recovery journey, just flourish in that way, right? So I'm Afro Indigenous, so I'm half black and half Native American, and Native American people, and they just have a very rich spirituality and the way they practice that and stuff. So, going into recovery, I never really got inside of my native side and that spiritual part of my life. But a couple of years in, I was just like striving for. I think I struggled a lot with that identity crisis, like a little bit still. Like, I was seeking God, but I was not. I was still like feeling like my skin was two sizes too big, and I have this whole family and Native American side that I have never even visited or never even went out and experienced that culture really. And after doing so, learning about my history, learning about my culture and spiritual practices that we do has enriched my life so much. And there's some amazing, amazing Native American spirituality principles that I find very similar to virtually all religions. And I love that. And now being able to teach that, because just like yourself, I get to teach, classes of like this we call them the grandfather teachings, which are like seven, like they're like spiritual principles in which we live by, right? Kind of like how you have spiritual principles as well, right?
Yeah, and that's something that I'm really excited to explore on one of our episodes of this podcast is those teachings. I think something that is really important uh, in spirituality is to recognize how um, all the various spiritual paths share common principles,
Absolutely.
right?
Truth,
Yeah,
love.
connection,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then that there's
faith.
they correlate, right? And whenever I hear it, and humility too, right? Whenever I hear, because one of the things I remember, I was teaching the seven grandfather teachings, and a client who was in the 12-step program for many, many years, and he ended up relapsing, but he knew the book front to back, and he said, this is almost identical to our 12 principles, spiritual principles. And I was like, yeah, you'll find that with a lot of, if you seek out other religions and stuff or anything really spiritually, like you're going to find like common themes, very common themes,
Yeah.
like tell the truth,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. And it it still bums me out a little bit, even though I've come to terms with it, when I find people are very dogmatic about what they believe. And I understand where that comes from. I get it. Um, but I think that in order for people to really benefit from this kind of lifestyle, from spirituality, they should be able to eventually expand their horizons and be able to see that somebody that's Christian has a lot more in common with somebody that's Muslim or Jewish or
Absolutely.
whatever other faith than they have not in common with them, right? That all
Yeah.
those differences is what actually creates the separation from other people and also from God.
Yeah, absolutely. I told you about my greatest book I've read, I believe, is the Why People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Height. And that was like my first psychology book that I just really like fell in love with, because it talked about, why people are divided by politics, and religion as well, and the commonalities between the two. But one things I really think about now is, working in different workplaces and stuff, is that, if I'm to follow my spiritual principles, I'm to be open minded and to hear someone out, right? And to at least attend a conversation as if the person knows a little bit more information than I do, and that I can learn something from it, right? And that has been difficult at times,
That's a
for
tough one.
sure. But we've definitely talked a lot about like politics and different things of that nature. Do you think, like, with the 12 steps, your political stance sort of changed or anything like that? Or
Well, I don't even, I've never been somebody that was political to begin with. I only started to explore politics right around when COVID hit,
right?
and I started to pay attention to it. To be honest, my overarching perspective on politics is that it's a it's sort of like a game,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Whose side
It's
are you on?
whose side are you
Right?
on,
Yeah, that's
right?
the game, right? Like,
What
are you
team
with
what
us
team
or
are
you're
you
against
on?
us, right? And I think Bush said something that after the 9/11 attacks, I can't remember what his quote was, but it was something very, very similar to kind of like, I think he said, you're either with us or you're against us when they were about to invade Iraq. And that kind of like, activates that whole tribal part of our brain, which is like rally together, and it is a
Yeah.
game. It
Yeah, it
is a
is a game.
game.
And I know that following politics has not really served, it's probably a net negative more than it is a net
Yeah.
positive in my own personal day-to-day life, which is why, one of the resolutions I've made in this new year is to stay away from Twitter, stay away from following news stories,
Right. Right.
because again, I found that it really doesn't do much for my personal happiness. Uh, Most of the stuff that's printed in the news is very biased. It's skewed in a certain way, and so you know it's very hard to suss out any kind of like truth in what's being shown. And ultimately, I go, I'm not here in this world to, pick the right candidate or anything like that. I'm here to grow closer to God, to be of service to others. And I'm sure we'll be talking about politics in future podcasts. But overall, I think that it's important for people who are on the spiritual path not to get too deeply politicized.
Absolutely, and I think that's kind of what messed up. Like when I was going through my sort of like personal inventory, so to speak, my resentments, and I didn't realize how much organizations or politics were keeping me sick. Were keeping me very sick. Just like any other resentment, it's the root of my problems, right? It's my number one killer. So, I had to completely rewire the way that I think, about systems and how the world works. And sometimes, in my community, I think differently than people, and that's okay. But I found through, working a program that makes me realize my shortcomings and my flaws is I'm able to kind of like, no, this is how I think, and this is why I think this, right? And I'm like able to set a boundary or to be firm with, because I was such a people pleaser before. I would just say anything to anyone, right? So
Yeah.
now it's just like like using those in those tough conversations and stuff like that. And I truly think like love, truth, like all those principles are really what the world needs more of. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all of these levels of resolution, um, which sort of stack on top of each other. And for me, the highest level is the spiritual perspective, right? I'm not like a physical person with a soul. I'm a soul with a body.
Right.
Now, is that my everyday experience? No. I often get sucked into the needs of the body, the obsessions of the mind, the insecurities that rise up because of, let's say, thinking, okay, what does the future hold for me and my wife? Like these kinds of things. But thankfully, I have a spiritual resolution, which, like I said, is kind of the highest level for me, where I can go and look at it and say, what is the use of worrying about all this stuff? I'll control what I can control, and the rest is God's will, right?
Absolutely.
The pandemic, for example, super
Yeah.
hot topic,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
very controversial, but
Yeah.
like to me that was God's will,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's something that I need to learn to accept and not get down into these lower resolutions and like, take the shot, don't take the shot, like us versus them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. I've heard it said before, we're human. We're not human beings having spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings having human experiences. And I love that quote. I'm not sure who said it, but, just being able to accept things differently and look through things through God's will has changed. You said you had that perspective change, and it's like, um, trying to explain that to a normal person who's not in our 12 step fellowship sometimes is very exhausting because they have no idea how much a person can change and how much our mindset is derived from I'm not steering the wheel, right? And like I've had so many experiences like that where I've been hanging out with people and something happens and they're like, "Why are you not angry?" Like they're like, "Why?" Gemma, I've never seen you angry. Like, why are you not angry? And I just like, I'm like, if only you knew, the old Gemma, you know. But that's because I live along a basis in faith, which is that I'm not to take the wheel and to steer. Like, sometimes things are going to go left, sometimes things are going to go right in my life, but it's how I deal with them and my actions and reactions to them that are going to determine my serenity, my peace, or as you said, happiness, right? So when I think about this saying, there's what, 7 billion people in the world. Who would you rather change, Jama? The 7 billion or the one? And I'm not a mathematician, but the one seems a lot easier, right? So I always just kind of like something doesn't happen that doesn't align with what I want, and I have to surrender to the fact that I'm not steering at all times, and that has changed my outlook and perspective on along life's just a tremendous amount that I can't even go into explain, but I'm sure we'll talk more about how accepting life on life's terms has kind of changed how we view the world now.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's super important, especially for those of us in recovery, but in a broader sense for anybody who's looking to grow and develop a more mature, expansive view of life themselves in the world.
So speaking of the podcast, we're gonna wrap up here shortly. But what are when you think of like I can't remember even how the idea of the podcast did start, but I believe it was just kind of like a passing thought where we had like a very very great conversation, or like we should have recorded that. And so, what are your views with this podcast and where it can go and all that sort of stuff?
So I don't have any kind of specific vision for it, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I want to record episodes with you, with guests, right? For us to host people and interview them, especially those who are in recovery, and in order to dive a little bit deeper and explore post 12 step recovery. What does that look like for other people, right? For me, it
Mm.
looks a certain way. For you, it's going to look a certain way. And just to give people out there who are in the same position, who are either in addiction and looking to get out, or who are in some sort of recovery program, like how can you continue to grow so that you can feel you can feel good,
Right,
right?
right.
Instead of getting stuck at a certain point. So
Hmm.
I'm hoping that through this podcast we can explore those ideas and help people that way.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I agree with that. And I also I like to hear different, people's through working at this addiction center, I've different programs that people have done, like a smart recovery or that I forget that other one name.
Refuge.
Refuge recovery. I would love to hear from people in that, or yeah, just different ways of introduce like an indigenous person and see like how they stayed sober through. And it's actually really cool. I found in recovery that there's indigenous people. We have like a 12 step model. It's called the Red Road to Recovery, and it's very very it's the same 12 steps. It's worded differently, and it's got like indigenous teachings and principles in it. And so like yeah, just like I have so many ideas, but I really think interviewing people and enriching their experience by having them come and share with other people is going to be a huge part of this podcast.
Perfect. Yeah, and we like who knows, right? What this is going to develop into, and what it'll become a year from now, 2 years from now, but it'll certainly that's sort of like our general direction in which we're going to go. And we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate all you guys for tuning in. I'm so excited to get this started and to continuously, push out more content. And it is, we are both very busy people, but we certainly make time for the Recovery Plus in 2023, because this is the first week. So I'm looking forward to a good year and to have this sort of take off and enjoy life one day at a time. So thank you again, Baz.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation, Jama.
As well.